A retired cop pointed a gun at a hoodie. Unaware the badge under it ran the whole county. Big Shaq's daughter didn't flinch. The real sheriff didn't need to shout. Oakridge thought it could intimidate silence. But this time, silence showed up with rank, and the law wasn't on their side. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Oakridge didn't creak or scream like cities did. It whispered. Breezes here moved with purpose. Down perfect lanes, lined with boxwoods trimmed so evenly, it felt like the hedges had contracts. Driveways were free of oil stains. Garages immaculate. House numbers bolted in straight symmetry. But symmetry could be deceiving. Beneath the polish, there were eyes, not warm, not curious, just watching. Shaquille O'Neal had seen cities build up and break down. He'd been loved on courts and respected in boardrooms. But Oakridge was different. It wasn't impressed by trophies or charity work. It wasn't even curious. It was closed, like a well-wrapped box sealed with invisible tape, and Shaq could feel the chill the moment the moving trucks left. He had come here for peace. Retired life. Slower days. His daughter Amara, a rising star in law enforcement, needed space too. After a decade of working twice as hard to be seen as half as dangerous, she had earned some quiet. Oakridge, at first glance, promised that safe schools, tree-lined paths, block parties, and homeowner newsletters. It looked like harmony, but the kind that only existed if you didn't ask who made the rules. Dean Blevins didn't wear a uniform anymore, but he still acted like he did. His smile had been trained into muscle memory, the type you flash when you want people to think you're harmless. But his eyes betrayed him. Cold. Scanning. He called himself a community watch captain, but everyone knew the truth. Dean was a badge without a precinct, a grudge without a cause, a man who couldn't let go of control, and found a way to repackage it behind HOA regulations. The week Shaq moved in, Dean welcomed him by citing a front yard violation. The basketball hoop Shaq hadn't even installed yet was non-compliant. No hello, no handshake, just a notice folded neatly and tucked into the mailbox like a threat in cursive. Shaq didn't rise to it, not because he was soft, but because he understood the game. Every morning, Dean cruised the neighborhood in a blacked-out SUV, tinted to state legal limits, flashing his volunteer ID like it meant something. He didn't knock on doors. He loitered. He hovered. And when he passed the O'Neal property, the speed dropped by 10. Amara noticed first. "You see that car?" she'd asked one morning, sipping coffee on the porch, voice low but sharp. Shaq didn't turn to look. "Been there every day. I counted 4 drive-bys yesterday." "That's not patrolling," she said. "That's targeting." He nodded but said nothing more. Shaq had learned the art of stillness, not passivity, but precision. And in places like Oakridge, stillness meant you saw what others ignored, like how neighbors who had previously smiled at the mail truck suddenly turned their backs when he and Amara walked past, or how the neighborhood newsletter left their names off the welcome column, or how garbage pickup somehow skipped their house twice in the first month. There were other families of color in Oakridge, scattered, distant, strategically silent. A black couple 5 blocks down who waved fast, then vanished inside. A mixed family with 3 kids, who always seemed to be just heading out whenever Shaq tried to introduce himself. There was fear here. Quiet, generational, well-practiced. Oakridge didn't scream racism. It calculated it, smoothed it over with bureaucracy and standards. Dean Blevins wasn't a loose cannon. He was policy in a golf polo. One Tuesday morning, Shaq stood on his front lawn trimming an already short hedge when a tan sedan pulled up. A man inside, older, white, with a thick mustache and eyes like worn leather, rolled the window halfway down. "You're Shaquille, right?" he asked, voice like gravel. Shaq nodded, cautious. "Used to live here 20 years back," the man said. "Just visiting a friend." Shaq waited. "You watch yourself. That guy, Dean, he ain't just a neighbor. He's a man who needs a target, and he hates not being feared." Shaq nodded again, slowly. "Thanks." The car drove off without another word. The message hung in the air like smog. That night, Amara found a flyer in their mailbox. Not from the HOA, just plain white paper with big block letters. Neighborhood safety meeting. HOA hall Thursday night. At the bottom, in red ink, attendance expected. Not required, expected. And only certain homes had received it. Mostly the ones on the West End. Mostly the ones not named O'Neill. Shaq unfolded the paper again after dinner, flattening the creases. Amara leaned on the kitchen island, watching him. He's drawing lines, she said. He's hoping we cross one. Shaq shook his head. He doesn't know we build from them. Outside, porch lights flickered across the cul-de-sac like slow blinks. Inside, the silence wasn't fear. It was focus. Oakridge didn't know it yet, but its symmetry had just met something stronger than fear. It had met patience. And patience, when cornered, moves like an avalanche. Amara O'Neill didn't wear fear. She wore routine. Every morning at 6:13 sharp, she stepped off the porch in running shoes worn at the heel, and a gray hoodie that swallowed her badge beneath its cotton folds. The same black joggers, the same left-ear AirPod tucked in but never playing. She didn't run to disconnect, she ran to observe. And in Oakridge, there was plenty to observe. She charted the neighborhood like a map. Cul-de-sacs stitched together like quilt patterns. Driveways wide enough to land helicopters, and porch flags that rippled harder when she passed. No one ever said a word to her. But she didn't need words. The way curtains fluttered when she appeared, the way wind chimes abruptly went silent. Oakridge's code was in its silences, and Amara read it fluently. The first time she saw Dean's car tailing her, she let it pass. The second time, she cut her jog short. The third, she started logging the times. His SUV always appeared 2 turns behind, idling at corners with its engine low and quiet, like a predator pretending to nap. No police markings, just a worn Ford Explorer with an aftermarket dashcam suction cup to the windshield, and a magnetic HOA logo slapped on the driver's door like a lie dressed as authority. Amara knew the difference between surveillance and curiosity. Dean Blevins wasn't curious. He was rehearsing. She never gave him what he wanted. No sudden turns, no hoodie pulled high, no reason to circle the legal drain. She moved like clockwork, not for her safety, but to keep the pattern clean. If he was waiting for her to slip, he'd be waiting a long time. On the 7th day, she saw his reflection in the mirrored window of a passing SUV. 2 cars behind now, trying subtlety, failing miserably. She smiled to herself, not out of amusement, but recognition. This was what her academy training hadn't taught her. How to be followed, not by criminals, but by the entitled. Dean wasn't a threat in the obvious way. He was dangerous in the sanctioned way. The kind that weaponized property codes and passive-aggressive notes. A man who didn't need handcuffs because he had a clipboard and an audience of nodding neighbors. She took a detour that morning, veering into the undeveloped west edge of Oakridge, where the houses hadn't been finished, and the trees still dared to grow wild. There were no sidewalks here, no HOA cameras, no mailboxes standing like sentinels. It was the one part of the neighborhood that felt unclaimed. Dean didn't follow. Not into the trees. Not past where the pavement ended. That told her everything. Back at home, Shaq was on the deck, sanding the wood down to bare grain. He didn't ask how the run went. He didn't need to. He looked up once, gave her that long father look, half question, half quiet solidarity. She answered with a nod. Later that day, Amara cleaned her service weapon, not because she planned to use it, but because clarity required control. Every piece, every slide, every click back into place was a ritual of discipline. She wasn't just the youngest elected sheriff in the region. She was the most underestimated. Her file was thick with commendations, her record spotless, but none of that mattered in Oakridge. Not to people like Dean. Here, she was just a jogger in a hoodie. That night, she spotted Dean's SUV parked diagonally at the edge of the cul-de-sac. No lights on, no movement, just waiting. She stood behind the curtain and watched for 20 minutes. He never got out. He wasn't here to approach. He was here to remind. The HOA newsletter arrived the next morning. The usual lawn tips, pest control schedules, a note from the board president. But in the bottom corner, a subtle reminder: residents are encouraged to avoid loitering, suspicious attire, or unmarked vehicles near school bus stops. No name, no specifics. But the message was clear. She didn't have to look like a suspect. She only had to be inconvenient. By the end of the second week, Amara had mapped every corner Dean parked on. She logged times, weather, patterns. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. When people like Dean pushed, they expected panic. She gave them patience instead. One morning, she paused at the top of Birchwood Hill, her breath steady, heartbeat low. Dean's car was 2 houses back. She reached into her hoodie and pulled out a small notebook, no bigger than a hand, flipped it open, and wrote something, slowly, deliberately. Then, without glancing back, she jogged away. Dean saw her do it. She knew he did. That was the point. A few days later, Shaq received an anonymous letter folded into a fake delivery slip. Your daughter is being watched. Be smart. Leave quietly. No return address. No signature. But the ink was bold. The letters typed in all caps, like a coward trying to sound official. Shaq folded it twice, burned it in the grill, and didn't mention it at dinner. Not yet. Amara didn't need to be told. She already felt it tightening around her. Not just from Dean, but from Oakridge itself, the very bones of the neighborhood shifting to close ranks. Security lights suddenly stayed on all night. Patrol cars started cruising more often, not stopping, just being seen. She recognized the tactic. Saturation. Subtle pressure. The long game of discomfort. But Oakridge didn't know who they were playing with. Amara had faced department politics, high-speed chases, and courtroom interrogations. She'd testified in cases that rattled cities. But here the challenge was deeper. It was about erasure. About making someone feel so out of place they erased themselves. She wasn't going to disappear. Her jogs continued. Unchanged. Same time. Same route. But now she carried something more than keys and ID. She carried knowledge. Of patterns. Of pressure points. Of who was watching. And who was about to be watched back. Dean Blevins still stood like a cop. Shoulders squared. Hands always inches from his belt even though the holster was long gone. In Oakridge he didn't need a badge or a weapon to feel powerful. What he had was something stronger: policy, proximity, and the illusion of law. He walked the neighborhood like it was precinct property, eyes always scanning, always calculating. He hadn't worn the uniform in over a decade, but the residue of it still clung to him, like smoke in old drapes. He didn't retire with grace. He was forced out quietly, after a use-of-force incident that never made the news but did reach a lawyer's desk. The department signed the papers, shook his hand, and thanked him for service. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a redirection, and Dean took it like a man unwilling to admit he was being removed. He wasn't finished, just reassigned, and Oakridge, with its manicured laws and paper-thin tolerance, became his new post. He joined the HOA board within 6 weeks of moving in. No one ran against him. No one wanted to. Dean knew how to talk just enough to get elected, and just little enough to keep power. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He suggested. He reminded. He authored guidelines with phrases like upholding the culture of the community and maintaining legacy standards. Everyone understood the subtext. No one challenged it. To Dean, people were categories: compliant or disruptive, native or outsider, legacy or threat. He never said black. He said non-traditional buyers. He never said keep them out. He said vetting residency more carefully. And when new families arrived, especially those who looked like they didn't shop at the Oakridge Country Market, Dean took notes. He noticed everything: mailbox color, car models, kids' play schedules, whether a lawn was mowed before or after 10 a.m. His logs were handwritten, dated, and organized in a black binder he called the ledger. Most thought it was a running joke, but Dean wasn't laughing. That binder gave him a sense of control in a world he believed had abandoned rules. When Shaquille O'Neal moved in, Dean pretended not to recognize him. It was easier to reduce him to a checklist violation than to acknowledge his status. Shaq was tall, sure, but Dean had seen tall men lose everything in a courtroom. Fame didn't impress him. It insulted him, especially when it belonged to someone who had the audacity to look comfortable in a neighborhood Dean had curated with quiet force. But it wasn't Shaq that bothered him most. It was the daughter. Amara O'Neal moved like she knew more than she was saying. She didn't wave. She didn't explain herself. She didn't volunteer for block committees or attend integration socials. She ran every morning with eyes open, body poised, presence undeniable. Dean didn't know her title, but he knew the signs. He'd seen enough officers in his life to know when someone moved like they'd earned the right to command. That's what made it worse. Dean watched her through a lens, warped by resentment. Every calm look she gave him felt like defiance. Every jog that passed his SUV, without flinch or fear, felt like challenge. She wasn't scared. And to Dean, that wasn't just unusual, it was unacceptable. He'd told the board she was testing boundaries. He mentioned suspected surveillance equipment on her unmarked SUV. He casually brought up neighborhood safety irregularities. The HOA president, a man who feared conflict more than injustice, just nodded and sipped from his coffee. Dean took their silence as a mandate. He intensified his patrols. Unofficial, of course. He drove slower near their home. He made note of every unfamiliar guest that parked too long in their driveway. He left citations on the edge of legality. When questioned, he deflected with phrases like due diligence and keeping the community safe. He knew exactly where the legal line was, and he danced right along it. It wasn't about the rules, it was about bending perception. He understood that control wasn't always about enforcement. It was about suggestion. If enough neighbors believed something was wrong, they didn't need proof. They just needed permission to turn away. Dean had spent years learning how to wield that kind of subtle force. Not in courtrooms or cells, but in casual conversations. The kind that shaped opinion over fences and barbecue grills. He painted the O'Neills as outsiders. Not because they broke laws, but because they didn't blend in. They didn't play the Oakridge game. And that made them dangerous. But underneath the control, Dean was unsettled. The neighborhood wasn't reacting the way he'd expected. There were neighbors who didn't co-sign his whispers. Some had started nodding at Amara when she passed. A few teenagers even waved at Shaq, openly. That scared him more than anything. Influence. The kind he couldn't file a complaint against. He doubled down. He drafted new proposals for HOA approval. Curfews disguised as quiet hour regulations. Surveillance upgrades proposed as community safety enhancements. And a revised vehicle code that suspiciously mirrored the description of Amara's SUV. He presented them with calm rhetoric and data points from recent upticks in neighborhood concern. Most of it was fabricated, but Oakridge didn't verify concern. It just validated it. Still, the girl didn't break pattern. She ran. She returned. She nodded when nodded to. And the SUV remained parked neatly in the driveway. Tires aligned. Spotless. Dean felt the tension coil inside him like a spring. He wasn't getting under her skin. He was being watched right back. One night, he saw her stop during her run, not far from the neighborhood lake. She bent down, tied her laces, and then turned to look directly at his SUV. Just for a second. No glare. No reaction. Just acknowledgement. Then she jogged off. Dean didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he filed a report to the board about suspicious surveillance activities involving recording equipment. It went unanswered. The president replied 2 days later with a neutral, "We'll keep an eye on it." Dean felt his grip loosening. He had spent his life trying to control the chaos he believed was always around the corner. Oakridge had promised him sanctuary. But now the walls were shifting. A sheriff had moved in, and he hadn't even known it. Not just a jogger, not just a resident, but a woman with legal weight, moral clarity, and a father who wouldn't back down. Dean wasn't afraid of guns. He was afraid of irrelevance. And Amara O'Neill, without raising her voice, without drawing a weapon, was making him smaller by the day. Shaquille O'Neal had learned long ago that not every fight was meant to be fought out loud. On courts, in boardrooms, on stages, the volume of his presence had always been enough. But Oakridge wasn't loud. It was clinical, polished, whispered. They didn't call him a threat. They called him a novelty. "He's a celebrity," one woman said, not knowing he was within earshot. "He's harmless," another muttered while trimming her hydrangeas. "He's temporary," a man near the community dog park told his friend over morning coffee. That one stuck the hardest. Temporary. Like he was visiting. Like his presence was borrowed. Like he hadn't bought the property with his own check and renovated it with his own hands. As if he didn't belong in a neighborhood full of fences, pretending to be walls. Shaq didn't show anger. That was part of the training. Not formal, not institutional, but generational. He moved through Oakridge, with practiced grace. Morning walks, afternoon supply runs, backyard projects. He made himself visible, but not confrontational. Present, but never imposing. He wasn't shrinking. He was observing, and what he saw wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Oakridge's racism didn't come with slurs. It came in policy notes, in side glances, in the prolonged silence after he greeted a neighbor, and got a smile that didn't reach the eyes. It came in the absence of invitations, the flyers for community events that never made it to their mailbox, the neighborhood watch emails that mentioned suspicious vehicles on their street. the same week his cousin visited from Atlanta. He noticed Amara's jaw every time she came back from her morning run, tighter than when she left. Her eyes didn't speak, but he read them fluently. She wasn't shaken. She was sharpening. Each jog wasn't just exercise. It was reconnaissance. She was collecting data. Who watched, who followed, who whispered when she passed. They didn't talk about it much, not because it wasn't real, but because it was constant. You didn't speak of air, unless it was poisoned. And in Oakridge the air was always slightly off. One Sunday morning, he found a pamphlet on his windshield. HOA code updates. Harmless at first glance. Paragraphs about parking permits, front lawn decor, acceptable noise levels, but buried inside was a line that read, all decorative displays must reflect neutral seasonal themes, consistent with community values. Neutral. Community values. Shaq had seen enough contracts to know when someone was trying to say not yours. He didn't show it to Amara. She had her own weight to carry. Instead, he folded the pamphlet neatly and slid it into the drawer beside the grill lighter. One more log for the fire. He'd spent his life being underestimated, being used, being admired at a distance, but never quite embraced up close. He'd seen rooms freeze when he entered, not because he was threatening, but because he disrupted expectation. He was too big, too bold, too black to be safe. Oakridge dressed its discomfort in khakis and committee votes. It didn't come to your door screaming. It just made sure it stayed closed when you knocked. The barber down in Glen Hollow, one town over, said it plain. That place don't want you there, Shaq. Not you. Not her. It's not about what you do. It's about what you prove. Shaq nodded. We ain't going nowhere. The barber grinned. That's what they're scared of. He spent more time outside now, not as a warning, as a statement. Every swing of a hammer on the back deck. Every lawn chair unfolded. Every basketball he shot alone in the driveway. It all said the same thing. I'm not hiding, and I'm not temporary. The HOA sent a survey one week. What do you think Oakridge should prioritize in the upcoming year? Shaq wrote one word in the blank space. Integrity. He didn't expect a response. He didn't get one. But he kept the copy. One afternoon, he stood in line at the local hardware store, waiting to buy cedar planks. A man behind him made conversation with the clerk. Friendly. Light. Then he saw Shaq's cart. Building something nice? The man asked, his smile tight. Just something permanent, Shaq replied. The man chuckled, uneasy. Hope the HOA's okay with it. Shaq turned slowly, looked the man in the eyes. If they're not, they'll learn to be. The man looked away. Amara noticed the shift too. Not in the laws. In the tension. There was more caution now. The neighbors who once avoided eye contact were now over-polite, too polite. Good morning, Mr. O'Neill. Like they were overcompensating for the cold they'd previously served with a smile. Shaq didn't need apologies. He needed change, and change wasn't loud. It was persistent. He met quietly with a legal consultant. A black woman named Jasmine, who reviewed HOA bylaws for discriminatory language. She found 3 clauses open to legal challenge, 2 that bordered on illegal, 1 that had been used only on families of color. You want to sue? She asked. Shaq shook his head. Not yet. I want them to know I could. Jasmine smiled. That's sometimes louder. Back home, Amara placed another envelope in the drawer. Another anonymous note. Another nameless warning. Shaq saw her pause, fingers tightening slightly before she released it. How many now? He asked. 9. He didn't ask what they said. He already knew. He'd heard them before, just in different fonts. Shaq sat on the porch that evening, watching the street go quiet. The silence here had weight, but it wasn't suffocating him anymore. It was feeding something inside. Not anger. Resolve. The fire wasn't wild. It was steady, contained, controlled, and it wasn't going out. The air was sharp that morning, the kind that sliced through breath before it even warmed your throat. The sun had barely nudged above the tree line. When Amara pulled into the cul-de-sac, her tires whispering against the pavement like a secret. She wasn't in uniform. She didn't need to be. A gray hoodie hung loose over her shoulders, sleeves pushed up just enough to reveal the smooth glint of a watch too sleek to be casual. Her black cargo pants were crisp but relaxed, and the boots she wore were department issued, though no one here would have known that. The SUV door creaked open, slow and deliberate. Amara moved without hurry. unlocking the rear hatch where a black duffel sat, ordinary to anyone passing by. Inside were files for court, case notes, and the crisp smell of laminated authority. She had stopped here, just 2 blocks from home, to swap folders before heading out to her satellite office. Her job demanded she stay nimble, unpredictable, but she'd been too predictable here, too methodical. Oakridge had been watching, and one pair of eyes in particular had been waiting for this exact moment. Dean Blevins wasn't on patrol. He was stalking. His SUV was parked 2 houses down, engine still warm, breath fogging in rhythm with his anticipation. His hand was already twitching near the glove box. No radio, no dispatch, just him, his paranoia, and a weapon he hadn't officially drawn in 10 years. But he didn't need authorization. In his mind, his badge had never left. It had just changed shape into bylaws, suspicion, and fear twisted into confidence. He saw Amara reach into the back of the SUV, and didn't wait. His car roared forward, tires lurching, halting 10 feet from her with the front bumper at an aggressive angle. The door slammed open. He didn't shout at first. He stared, gun already in his hand, no holster, just ready.
"Step away from the vehicle," he barked, voice cracking from adrenaline.
Amara didn't flinch. Her hand remained inside the trunk, fingers wrapped around the handle of her bag. She turned slowly, calmly, her head tilting in controlled disbelief. Her eyes didn't widen. Her mouth didn't open. There was nothing frantic in her body, just stillness, heavy like gravity. Neighbors started to appear, first behind blinds, then in doorways. One woman gasped audibly. Someone lifted a phone, then another. A small crowd began to thicken, not rushing, just trickling in like birds before a storm. Dean's voice rose. "Hands where I can see them. Right now." She raised her hands halfway, palms out, not in surrender, but signal. She wasn't tense. She was measured. Like she knew how many people were watching. Like she knew how many seconds she had before the world spun out. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. Amara didn't answer. Her breath was steady, her eyes locked on his, unblinking. She didn't move an inch. The duffel remained in the trunk, untouched since her pause. Dean took a half step forward, gun quivering in his hand. The kind of quiver that doesn't come from fear, but from rage that's no longer masked. A teenager across the street whispered, "Is that a real gun?" His friend nodded. "Already recording." "You stealing this car?" Dean shouted again, louder now, like volume would substitute for cause. "You don't live here. This is private property." The absurdity hung in the air. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone knew where she lived. The O'Neills weren't strangers. They were the main attraction of Oakridge gossip. Shaq on the deck, Amara jogging every morning. But in this moment, facts weren't facts. They were threats to the man holding the gun. Amara finally moved, but only her right hand, inching toward her back pocket, in slow, deliberate rhythm. Dean's hand jerked upward, finger twitching. The phones caught everything. His posture, her restraint, the space between fear and control that pulsed like a heartbeat through the crowd. "I'm reaching for my ID," she said calmly, voice low but crisp, each syllable landing like a gavel. Dean hesitated. Just for a second. That second changed everything. She pulled a black leather badge wallet from her pocket and held it out. Open, unshaken. The gold glinted in the early sun, clear and unmistakable. Sheriff Amara O'Neill. The crowd collectively inhaled. Dean's eyes darted from the badge to the phones, to the neighbors, to the camera, now live streaming on someone's Instagram feed. And in that moment, his grip faltered. He didn't lower the gun yet, but the weight of it shifted in his hand, suddenly heavy with reality. "I suggest," Amara said, still calm, "you lower your weapon before you give this entire block a new reason to explain themselves in court." Dean stepped back. The barrel dipped an inch, then 2, then pointed down at the asphalt like a regret. But it wasn't regret in his face. It was humiliation. Exposure. The sudden rush of a man, realizing the uniform he wore in his head, had just been ripped off him, publicly. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't move closer. She stood exactly where she had from the start. Her voice when she spoke again was firmer, but not raised. "Your authority ends at the clipboard, Mr. Blevins. Not 1 inch beyond." Dean swallowed. His lips pressed so tight they turned white. Without another word, he turned and marched back to his vehicle, his gun now a shameful shape in his hand. He didn't holster it, just tossed it onto the passenger seat, like it burned him. The engine started again, but the roar didn't sound like control. It sounded like retreat. As he backed away, slowly, the neighbors stayed silent. Not out of fear, out of judgment. Every door that had cracked open now swung fully wide. Every phone stayed raised. No one defended him. No one interrupted. Oakridge had seen enough. Amara didn't chase him. She didn't file a charge on the spot. She didn't make a scene. She closed the trunk, zipped the duffel, walked back to the driver's side, and paused. One final glance toward the houses, toward the people who had seen it all, some for the first time, others for the 100th, and then she drove away, slow, dignified, in full control. She never once raised her voice. She never once raised a hand. And yet the entire street felt like it had been turned inside out. Because sometimes the loudest detonation isn't sound. It's silence. And in Oakridge, silence had just exploded. It didn't happen with sirens or handcuffs. No dramatic takedown. No sudden shouts. Just a shift. A subtle, irreversible shift in air. In perception. In power. Dean Blevins had frozen. His body stiffened like bad concrete. Lips parted. Eyes locked on the badge in Amara O'Neill's hand. His mouth tried to form denial, but no sound emerged. His right hand, the one that had held the weapon, twitched once, then dropped to his side like it had betrayed him. The SUV idled behind him, a silent witness to the moment his grip on this neighborhood shattered. Amara didn't step back. She didn't retreat. Her hand still held the badge wallet high, firm, as if presenting a truth no one could ignore. The sun, now clearing the treetops, caught the gold just right. That star-shaped emblem, etched with Sheriff's Department, Precinct 12, burned itself into every eye on the block. "You just pulled a gun," she said, the softness of her voice almost surgical, on the sheriff. Dean blinked. Once. His lips moved again, soundless, searching for a way out. But nothing came. No justification. No orders to bark. No noise to hide behind. Across the street, a mother clasped her hand to her chest. Her son, still recording, whispered, "She's the sheriff?" to no one in particular. A jogger who had slowed near the corner came to a complete stop, staring, mouth ajar. The scene was already online. The clip had uploaded within seconds of the badge being raised. By the time Dean lowered his eyes, it had over 12,000 views and counting. Amara tucked the badge back into her hoodie pocket, with the same precision she used to handle evidence. No theatrics, just intent. Then she picked up her bag, closed the trunk, and turned toward her vehicle's door. She didn't rush. Her calm was louder than any command. That calm wasn't for Dean. It was for the people watching, for every neighbor whose silence had danced too long with complicity. She was done performing humility. Now she was simply existing in truth. Dean didn't speak, but the tremor in his stance said everything. This wasn't a mistake to him. It was a collapse. Of control. Of perception. Of power. He had believed himself the gatekeeper of order in Oakridge. But standing across from him, unarmed and unwavered, was someone the system had trusted more than it had ever trusted him. She was law. She was order. And she didn't need his permission. He turned back toward his SUV, like a man aging decades in seconds. The weight of his holstered shame clanked against the silence as he pulled open the door and slid into the seat. His hands fumbled at the steering wheel, knuckles pale, as if gripping it might hold his world together. But the world had already seen. The world had already judged. Amara sat inside her vehicle for a moment, letting the engine hum softly beneath her. She didn't drive off immediately. Instead, she looked out the window, scanning each face still lingering on their porches, phones half lowered, mouths uncertain. She didn't demand anything. Her presence did the talking. Then she smiled. It wasn't a smug smile. It wasn't self-satisfaction. It was a quiet reclaiming of space, of identity, of agency. A smile not for Dean, but for herself, and for every woman who had ever had to hold her tongue behind a uniform. A smile that said, "I'm still here, and I'm not hiding anymore." Dean's SUV backed out slowly. No tire squeal. No retreat worthy of Defiance. Just quiet exit. The kind of exit no man in uniform ever plans to make. He drove straight past 3 cameras still rolling. His name would be on Twitter by noon. His HOA status would be questioned by evening. And by morning, the headlines wouldn't just read "Retired cop draws on local woman." They would read "Retired cop draws gun on county sheriff." Inside the HOA office that afternoon, board members sat uncomfortably close. A printed screenshot of the incident, paused at the precise moment Amara revealed her badge, was being passed around like a legal bomb. The president of the board, Harold Stone, cleared his throat 5 times before saying anything useful. He offered the phrase, "This is regrettable," but it landed like wet paper. One member asked, "Do we know if there's a formal complaint?" No one answered. The silence in the room was different now. Less smug, more suffocating. Because for the first time in Oakridge's carefully curated history, the rules had been bent too far. The illusion of safety, once built on exclusion, had now drawn the wrong kind of attention. They weren't protecting the neighborhood anymore. They were exposing it. Meanwhile, at a precinct 2 towns over, Amara sat at her desk, sifting through case reports, like nothing had happened. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, text from colleagues, reporters, and even a few neighbors she didn't know by name. Most said the same thing. "I saw the video," one deputy wrote. "You handled that like a damn wall of steel." She replied to none of them. She didn't need praise. What she needed was for the system to work the same for her as it did for the ones it was designed to protect. And for once, just once, it had. Shaq walked into the station late that afternoon, carrying 2 iced coffees and a look that hovered somewhere between pride and fury. He set one cup on her desk without speaking, then sat across from her. The silence between them was heavy but warm, like smoke after a fire's been put out. "You okay?" he asked. Eventually, Amara nodded. "It was bound to happen." Shaq tilted his head. "Yeah, but it didn't have to happen like that." "No," she said, her eyes fixed on the case file in front of her. "But it happened on camera, and that's gonna make the difference this time." He leaned back, sipping his drink. "It better." Later that evening, Amara received a call from the mayor's office. Not the Oakridge mayor, hers. A cautious voice thanked her for her restraint, offered support, asked if there was anything she needed. "Yes," she replied, voice even. "I need every department head within my jurisdiction to know what just happened, and to understand why it's a problem." There was a pause, then a mumbled agreement. The clip had hit local news by dinner time. Dean's name was trending. The HOA had disabled comments on their website. The words racial profiling and abuse of authority had been paired with Oakridge for the first time in any public record. The illusion had cracked, and the community, so obsessed with appearance, was now staring into its own unfiltered reflection. Back on Birchwood Hill, porch lights flickered on. Shaq sat in a rocking chair, watching the cul-de-sac as dusk softened the edges of the homes. Neighbors passed by slowly, some waved, some didn't. A few crossed the street early, awkward in their courtesy. He didn't mind. He wasn't here for them. He was here for Amara. Inside, she sat at the dining table, laptop open, badge resting beside it, not hidden, not tucked away, just visible. As it should be. Because Sheriff O'Neill wasn't a secret anymore. She was the storm they didn't see coming. And she'd smiled while it landed. The HOA meeting was called in a rush, not out of urgency but optics, held in the Oakridge Civic Hall, a beige-bricked building that smelled like pledge and privilege. It was the kind of gathering where tone mattered more than truth. The board sat at the front behind a folding table, name placards neatly angled, voices even. Dean Blevins occupied his usual chair, second from the left, posture fixed, face tight with the kind of restraint that hides behind protocol. No mention of the incident by name. No statement acknowledging that a retired cop had pointed a loaded gun at the sitting sheriff of the county. Instead, Dean read from a prepared note. "My actions were in the interest of neighborhood safety, made with no knowledge of the individual's identity. In uncertain times, hesitation can risk lives." He stopped just short of apology. The board nodded, with the hollow uniformity of people who didn't want to be on camera, didn't want a side, didn't want heat. The mayor didn't show up. A junior rep sat in his place, fidgeting, eyes cast downward, muttering about ongoing conversations and mutual understanding. It was a performance, one that smelled of well-pressed panic. Outside the hall, the air was different, thicker. The neighbors who had shown up lingered in tight clusters. Whispers bounced between lawn chairs and golf carts. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone had heard Amara's title. But now that it was time to speak, to act, to pick a side, the town chose silence. 2 days later, Shaq rolled out his custom grill onto the driveway. Smoked ribs. honey-glazed wings, peach cobbler that could start wars. He strung up lights, set out chairs, even printed flyers himself. Oakridge Neighborhood Barbecue. Bring a plate, bring your voice. But by 6:00 p.m., not a single neighbor came. The smell of mesquite drifted down the block, but no footsteps followed it. No plates, no greetings. Only the sound of distant lawn sprinklers and the occasional garage door closing faster than usual. Windows stayed shut, blinds half drawn like eyes too scared to witness. One neighbor across the street, a man named Whitmore who had once asked Shaq to autograph his son's basketball, pulled into his driveway, saw the lights, and reversed out again without waving. Shaq stood at the grill, arms crossed, eyes on the street, as the smoke curled into the empty sky. Amara leaned against the porch railing, watching, silent. She didn't need to ask how it felt. This wasn't new to either of them. Not the cold shoulder, not the sudden allergy to community, but it still stung. The block wasn't angry. It was calculating, weighing risk. Should they defend the sheriff and be labeled as agitators, or keep their heads down and hope the storm would pass over them untouched? The answer, as always in places like Oakridge, was avoidance. The next morning, the HOA newsletter was emailed out. A full page dedicated to community safety awareness. No names, just a paragraph that hinted at heightened tensions due to recent misunderstandings. It encouraged residents to trust the systems in place and not engage in divisive commentary. Translation: forget what you saw, and don't ask us to acknowledge it. Shaq forwarded the email to Amara with one sentence. They wrote 300 words and said nothing. She didn't reply, just saved the message into a folder titled Oakridge, Evidence. Across the street, something changed. Subtle, but loud in its own way. The McNeils, a white family with 2 Labradors and a Black Lives Matter sticker half scraped off their garage door, suddenly stopped waving in the mornings. The teenage boy who once bounced a ball down the driveway now kicked it in silence. Eyes averted. At the local market, a cashier who used to chat about college ball, now just scanned items in silence. The butcher who gave Shaq tips on ribs, now looked past him like he wasn't there. The world hadn't yelled, but it had turned. One neighbor, a quiet woman named Irene, approached Shaq during a morning walk. She glanced over her shoulder first, like she was sharing state secrets. "I'm sorry about everything," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "People, they're just scared." "Scared of what?" Shaq asked, genuinely. "Of being wrong," she said, before walking away. It stuck with him. Scared of being wrong. That week, Amara received her first formal complaint, filed anonymously through HOA channels. It read, "Suspicious use of unmarked government vehicle in residential zone. Suggest investigation into jurisdictional boundaries." The wording was legalistic, detached, designed to sound legitimate while ignoring the heart of the matter. She laughed when she read it. A short, bitter laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "They're not done," she said aloud. Shaq stepped in behind her, arms crossed. "Neither are we." The strategy shifted. Amara began documenting, not for media, but for record. Screenshots, emails, timestamps. She spoke to her department's legal advisor, who assured her that the footage alone was enough to open a civil inquiry, but Amara didn't want lawsuits. She wanted transformation. Lawsuits punished. Change prevented recurrence. Still, she knew this wasn't just about Dean. He was the face, not the foundation. The real threat was the system that closed ranks without being asked. One evening, Shaq met with an old friend from his media days. A quiet call led to a louder conversation. Days later, a national podcast dedicated to systemic injustice ran an episode titled Oakridge, a case study in camouflaged control. They didn't mention names. They didn't have to. Listeners connected the dots. The clip of Dean's outburst had already gone viral. This just gave it roots. Oakridge's social fabric didn't tear overnight. It unraveled slowly. One neighbor stopped attending HOA meetings. Another removed themselves from the board entirely. The local bakery took down their community partner sign. Microfracture. Small, silent breaks in the mask the town had worn for so long. Still, no one said Dean's name aloud. No one confronted him. No one asked Amara if she was okay. They didn't send flowers. They didn't send fire either. Just fog. Fog in the form of silence so thick it almost suffocated. But Amara didn't leave. Shaq didn't retreat. The lights on their porch stayed on every night. Her badge remained in plain view when she stepped out in uniform. Their laughter was still heard during backyard meals. They refused to disappear. One Thursday afternoon, Shaq walked to the mailbox and found a card, unsigned but handwritten, "Thank you for staying." He stood there for a long moment, card in hand, before sliding it into his back pocket. He didn't know who had written it. He didn't need to. It wasn't a win, but it was a The town had chosen silence. But silence had a volume now, and every quiet step Amara and Shaq took echoed louder because of it. Oakridge was watching. But now, for the first time, it was also being watched back. The first letter came on a Tuesday, folded in thirds, slipped through the mail slot like it didn't want to be seen. No return address, no salutation, just 4 words, typed in bold sans serif: "Get out while you can." Amara read it once, and didn't flinch. She slid it into a folder already labeled Oakridge, Civil Hostility, then set it beside the unopened file of HOA bylaws she'd begun combing through with lawyer's eyes. She didn't tell Shaq, not yet. The second one came 2 days later. "We remember Ferguson." No context, just implication. A shadow in sentence form. Amara folded it slower this time. Same font, same absence of address, but a slight difference. This one smelled faintly of pine, like it had been kept near a cleaning closet or a garage shelf. It reminded her how close this enemy really was, not some distant troll behind a screen. This was printed paper, local, personal. Shaq found out when the third note arrived. It was addressed to him. "How can you let your daughter disgrace this town?" The words hit him in the gut, not because they hurt, but because they didn't surprise him. He stood in the driveway for a long minute after reading it, sunlight catching the edge of the envelope like a warning. Then he walked inside, handed it to Amara, and said nothing. She slid it into the folder. 3.
They think this scares us?
He finally asked, voice low, steady. "No," she said. "They think it wears us down." That night, they counted a 4th. This one was different. Handwritten, slanted cursive: "I'm sorry for what they're doing to you. We don't all feel that way." No name, no signature, just that lonely sentence like a crack in the concrete. Still, Amara filed it with the rest. A different tone didn't mean a different motive. Sympathy could still be silence dressed in better clothes. By the end of the week, there were 8, 6 hostile, 2 apologetic, none direct. Shaq stared at the stack and finally said, "That's enough." He called in a favor. Not media, not law enforcement. A lawyer, an old college friend who now specialized in real estate and municipal regulation. They met at a small cafe on the edge of town, outside Oakridge's gates, where the air felt freer and the coffee came without passive glances. The lawyer's name was Miles. He wore a denim jacket over a courtroom demeanor and carried a satchel full of quiet weapons, zoning codes, legal precedent, policy traps buried under the guise of community values. Shaq didn't have to say much. He handed over the HOA rulebook and a copy of the latest amendments, recently passed with little notice. Miles flipped through them, eyebrows rising inch by inch. Then he exhaled. They rewrote residency clauses. Shaq leaned in. Targeting who? Anyone labeled non-legacy. That term's nowhere near standard. It's made up probably by someone who knows just enough to be dangerous. And guess what? It's not legally defensible. Shaq smiled. Not wide, just enough to mean war. Back at home, Amara updated the folder with a new tab: bylaw manipulations. She added dates, footnotes, precedents. Shaq's contact had already flagged 3 articles that could be challenged in court for discriminatory intent. They had quietly built a case, not to sue just yet, but to let Oakridge know it was being watched with eyes sharper than any HOA policy committee. The notes didn't stop. They came with more edge now. "You bring danger. You changed everything. We don't forget." One of them included a grainy printout of her badge photo. That one, she kept separate. She never reacted. She never responded. But her routine changed. Slightly. Jogging routes rerouted through more visible roads. Her cruiser, usually parked in the side drive, now sat out front, where the gold decal on the rear window gleamed in full view. The message was clear: "I'm here, and I'm official." Shaq made one change too. He began keeping a journal again, a habit he'd abandoned after retirement. But now the pen felt like armor. Every night he logged events: who looked too long, which neighbors muttered too quietly, which nights the motion light flicked on without reason. Not paranoia. Documentation. One evening, Amara found a fresh envelope on the windshield of her cruiser. This one wasn't typed or handwritten. It was a children's drawing. Crayons. A stick-figure woman in uniform, standing next to a house with smoke rising from a grill. A child had drawn it. No message, just image. She stared at it for a long moment, then brought it inside and tacked it to the fridge. Not all ghosts mean harm, she said. Shaq nodded. But the phrase stuck with him. Ghosts. That's what the threats had become. Not men in hoods, or mobs on lawns, but typed threats from hands too cowardly to sign. Words folded in guilt and fear, left behind like whispers. Ghosts don't knock. They haunt. But Shaq and Amara weren't afraid of ghosts. They faced worse. They faced systems that smiled while they suffocated you. Miles delivered his summary 2 days later. There are at least 5 actionable violations in your HOA's current bylaws, he said. 3 of them specifically cite ambiguous standards that statistically impact non-white residents. We can issue a legal warning, file injunctions, or leak the data. Shaq and Amara chose none of those yet. They instead requested a formal HOA review, citing resident concern over ambiguous policy language. It was quiet, strategic, the kind of move that forces a response without giving the town a villain to rally against. The board responded with a blanket statement about transparency in governance, an ongoing review. But something shifted. Board meetings started including a local reporter. 2 resignations followed, minor members, but noticeable. An emergency rewrite session was scheduled, and slowly, the letters stopped. Not because the town got better, but because it got scared. They didn't fear lawsuits. They feared exposure. Shaq grilled that Sunday. He didn't invite anyone, just him and Amara. They ate ribs and potato salad in folding chairs, the sounds of music humming low behind them. No speech, no confrontation. The folder sat inside, now thick enough to tip when picked up. The child's drawing still hung on the fridge. Outside, the wind picked up, blowing leaves across the lawn like confetti from a battle no one wanted to admit had happened. The ghosts still lingered, but they no longer knocked. It didn't come with warning. No press conference, no cryptic tweet, just a Dropbox link sent to 6 journalists, a county official, and 1 email address registered under sheriff, a1eel@gov.net. The subject line was blank. The file name read only HOA training footage. By noon, the video had 60,000 views. By dusk, it had split Oakridge into before and after. It opened with a shot of a plain conference room. Beige walls, plastic chairs, a long whiteboard with scribbled markers left half erased, as if the truth tried to hide itself even before it spoke. There was no timestamp, but the audio was clear, and so was the voice. Dean Blevins stood at the front, sleeves rolled, hands behind his back like a lecturer in a military academy. Behind him, a PowerPoint slide read, Behavioral Identification Tactics, Preserving Community Integrity. Now look, Dean's voice filled the frame. Calm and authoritative. We're not the police anymore. We don't have arrest powers. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. Oakridge has rules, and rules have tone. If someone doesn't match the tone, you spot that early. You move fast. He clicked to the next slide. A diagram of a car. An SUV that looked suspiciously similar to Amara's. Unmarked vehicles. Government plates. Out of routine patterns. You don't wait for something to happen. You log. You follow. You isolate. Laughter echoed faintly from off-screen. Then came the quote that turned the internet into a courtroom. Don't wait until they're in uniform. If they don't look like they belong before the badge, they don't belong after it either. The screen froze there. That frame, Dean's finger extended mid-lecture, his face caught in half-scowl became the image burned into national memory. The moment the mask came off, not just Dean's, Oakridge's. Within hours, local affiliates picked it up. Then regional papers. Then national networks. The headline wrote itself, ex-cop turned HOA leader caught teaching profiling tactics to homeowners. Dean went underground. No statement. No defense. The HOA board scrambled, releasing a clipped apology that blamed rogue interpretations and insisted that Dean had been speaking unofficially, but no one bought it. The footage was too clear. The words too deliberate. Shaq watched it on his living room TV, arms crossed, face unreadable. Amara stood behind him, not blinking once. This is what was hiding in plain sight, she said quietly. Shaq didn't respond, but a slow, knowing nod answered for him. Amara's department responded first. A formal request was filed for Dean's resignation from all municipal adjacent positions, including HOA leadership, community advisory boards, and any volunteer security affiliations. He had no recourse. Within 48 hours, his name was scrubbed from Oakridge's official directory. The mailbox outside his house was empty. His porch light stayed off. His SUV disappeared. The mayor finally addressed the situation. 11 days after the leak. "We take these revelations seriously," he read from a prepared statement, flanked by council members with identical expressions of discomfort. Oakridge must reckon with the underlying prejudices that allowed such conduct to go unchallenged. "We support the integrity of Sheriff O'Neill and all law-abiding residents who make our community stronger." No mention of Dean by name. No admission of complicity. But the words were enough to send a signal. Oakridge was now visible to the rest of the country, and that spotlight was unforgiving. Amara didn't respond to press requests. She declined interviews, ignored offers from primetime anchors, and refused to hold a press conference. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was precision, because when the system finally speaks for itself, the victims shouldn't have to scream. She walked into the county courthouse 2 weeks later, not as a plaintiff, not as a witness, but as a representative of the law. Her badge glinted against the navy blue of her formal uniform, the silver pin above her breast catching every camera flash. Reporters called her name. She didn't look at them. Her heels clicked with confidence down the hallway, echoing off marble floors like a metronome counting out justice. Inside, the case wasn't about criminal charges yet. It was about precedent. The county council had filed a formal motion to audit the Oakridge HOA's regulatory practices under civil rights codes. A special committee had been formed, and Amara had been invited to speak. She didn't write a speech. She didn't need one. She stood in front of the panel, hands steady at her sides, and told the story the town had tried so hard to forget. The profiling, the letters, the isolation, the quiet rewriting of rules. "I didn't ask to become a symbol," she said, voice measured. "I just wanted to live where I work. I wanted to jog without fear. I wanted my badge to mean what it's supposed to mean. But it took a man with a gun and a camera phone to prove what I already knew, that some people see authority only when it looks like them, and fear it when it doesn't." No theatrics. No tears. Just truth. The room was still when she finished. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was listening. Shaq stood in the back, not moving. He had come not as a father but as a witness. A man who had seen racism dress itself in respectability for decades, and now finally saw the seams fraying. After the hearing, letters began arriving again. But these were different. Handwritten. Signed. Some from other sheriffs. Some from residents in Oakridge who had never dared speak. One came from a retired judge, who wrote simply, "You reminded us what law looks like when it stands tall." Amara didn't keep these in a folder. She let them pile on the table. Unstacked, uncurated. Not trophies, just proof. Dean's house was listed for sale 2 weeks later. No open house, no photos, just a quiet for sale sign that appeared on a Wednesday and was gone by the following Monday. No one asked where he went. Oakridge tried to recover. The HOA board reshuffled. New language was added to the bylaws. Clear, measurable, reviewed by civil oversight. The board invited 2 non-white residents to join. It was small, cosmetic, but it was a start. At home, Amara moved the badge case from her bedroom to the front hallway. Not as a warning, as a reminder. Shaq still grilled every Sunday. The neighborhood didn't flock to it. But 1 or 2 people would wave now. A few would pause at the edge of the driveway, offering cautious hellos, small apologies buried in eye contact. Amara always nodded back, not to forgive, but to acknowledge, because silence may have built Oakridge, but truth had shaken its foundation. 6 months had passed since the video detonated the illusion. The air wasn't clear of tension, but it was thinner now. Lighter. You could breathe without second-guessing what you'd inhale. On the corner lot, with the newly painted shutters and a barbecue grill that had become local legend, Big Shaq stood barefoot in the grass, watering rose bushes planted by the kids from the new mentorship center. The Backcourt Project. The name was Amara's idea, a metaphor and a mission. The center had been her father's vision, realized after too many summers watching black boys chased out of skate parks and girls told their natural curls were a disruption at school. The center had started in a leased storefront just outside town limits, But it grew faster than anyone expected. 200 kids enrolled in its first quarter. Tutoring, legal literacy, fitness programs, college prep. Shaq wasn't just a figurehead. He was present, folding chairs, sweeping floors, sitting in circles with young men who spoke in half-truths until they saw he wasn't leaving. Amara, now officially the regional sheriff of Precinct 12, had moved into a new office across from City Hall. Her promotion wasn't a surprise. Not after the footage, the hearings, the audit, the public support that rippled outward like heat from pavement. She didn't campaign. She didn't need to. Her integrity had already spoken, and it had spoken in a language people were finally ready to hear. At the mailbox, Shaq found another letter. Handwritten. Blue ink. A teenager from Baltimore this time. Thank you for standing still, when it would have been easier to run. My little sister wants to be a sheriff now. He smiled, tucked it into the folder he kept for the center's wall of letters, and walked back up the driveway, his steps slow, heavy with the weight of earned peace. Dean Blevins' name was gone, literally. Scraped off the brick plaque at the HOA entrance. The initials had been ground down, the surface repainted. Officially he'd resigned, and relocated for personal reasons. Unofficially, Oakridge had quietly erased him like a typo too embarrassing to leave behind. His house sold off market. No neighbors helped load the truck. No goodbye barbecue. Just silence and an empty driveway. Shaq didn't speak of him. Not in interviews. Not at the center. Not at home. The point had never been about taking a man down. It was about lifting up what was being stepped on. Oakridge's lesson wasn't in Dean's departure. It was in the reckoning that followed. The new HOA board had grown cautious. More paperwork. More transparency. They published minutes now. Held open forums. Diversity on the board wasn't just a quota. It was now built into the charter. The new chair, a retired black school principal named Lorraine Briggs, had zero tolerance for euphemisms. In her first meeting, she made one thing clear. If you mean race, say race. We don't protect feelings over people anymore. The culture of the neighborhood began shifting. Not dramatically, but deeply. There were still flags, still codes, still rituals Oakridge clung to. But now when Amara jogged past, people waved, some clapped. A few simply nodded with a respect that didn't have to be spoken. She still ran in that same gray hoodie. She still carried her badge, but now no one questioned whether it belonged. Every Sunday Shaq grilled. He no longer invited anyone.
He didn't need to.
They came anyway. Not all, but enough. Families with questions, kids with curiosity. A single mom who asked if the center needed volunteers. A teenage boy who wanted to know how to build chests like Shaq. They'd eat, sit on the steps, listen to old music through outdoor speakers and feel for a moment what community was supposed to be. Amara joined when her shifts allowed, still quiet, still deliberate. She didn't talk much about the past, not because she'd buried it, but because she didn't want it to define the air around them. She'd nod at the faces who once avoided her gaze, offer brief conversation, and move on. The message was always clear. I remember, but I'm not here to punish. I'm here to protect. And that includes even the ones who had doubted her right to do so. Oakridge's kids had changed too. They rode bikes more freely, played louder, waved longer. There was a stretch of sidewalk where the neighborhood's black children had once avoided eye contact with patrol cars. Now they waved, sometimes even running beside them. One girl shouted, "Hey Sheriff O." Every time Amara passed, the adults took longer. Some wouldn't change, but they were quieter now. And even silence, when it replaced hostility, could be progress. At the local elementary school, Amara was asked to speak at a career day. She almost declined. Public speaking wasn't her lane, not in casual settings. But Shaq nudged her. Say what you needed to hear when you were 8, he said. So she did. She stood in a gymnasium filled with folding chairs and cautious teachers, and told the kids one thing. Authority doesn't come from volume. It comes from knowing who you are when the noise around you tells you otherwise. The applause was hesitant at first. Then real. Letters kept coming, from teachers, from precincts, from pastors. Some thanked her for her composure. Others apologized on behalf of places they didn't control. She accepted all of them the same way, quietly, gratefully, without letting them shape her. Back home, Shaq planted more rose bushes. He said it was about keeping his hands busy, but Amara knew better. He was building legacy without ceremony. something that would outlast even the story that brought them into the national eye. One evening, a news crew stopped outside the mentorship center. The anchor asked to interview Amara. She politely declined, motioning instead to one of the young girls reading under a tree nearby. "Talk to her," she said. "That's the story now." The crew left 10 minutes later. No cameras rolled. Oakridge wasn't perfect. There were still murmurs, still frozen glances when certain topics came up at HOA meetings, still neighbors who kept their distance, claiming neutrality like it wasn't already a position. But those voices no longer owned the room. They didn't set the tone. They didn't get to pretend the ground hadn't shifted beneath them. The system hadn't exploded. It had cracked. And through those cracks, light had entered. Shaq sat on the porch one late evening, arms behind his head, legs stretched long. The sky was bruising into blue and purple, the kind of dusk that made you sit in silence because anything else felt disrespectful. Amara joined him with 2 lemonades and the new badge he'd framed for her. "You proud?" she asked, nudging him. He didn't look at her, just sipped, then said, "Always was." This just gave the rest of them a reason to catch up. Oakridge didn't applaud. It didn't cheer. It didn't confess. But it listened now, and that, in the end, was enough. If this story made you pause, don't stay paused. Ask who writes the rules in your neighborhood, and who's left out of the room. Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it jogs past in a gray hoodie. Stay alert. Stay loud. Stay watching. Because silence was never neutral. It was just organized.